Thank you all so much for joining us today for Reboot, Rewrite, Recast, How Media and Entertainment Pivot in Times of Crisis. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. This is a very important conversation, and I'm so honored to be moderating it today. We have George Cheeks, President and CEO of CBS Entertainment Group, Donna Langley, Chairman of Universal Filmed Entertainment Group, and Ann Sarnoff, Chair and CEO of Warner Media Studios and Networks, and Group Chair and CEO of Warner Brothers. I cannot imagine a better trio to have this conversation with today. There is no doubt that COVID has dramatically changed the entertainment landscape. There have been stoppages to production. We're now seeing that reopen again. There's been a transformation of the direct-to-consumer business, as well as a lot of changes to the theatrical business as well. So every piece of this puzzle is in flux. And one thing I heard in talking to each of these panelists before we started today is this idea that the media companies really have plans to get them through the rest of this year. But after then, it's really uncertain what the media landscape is going to look like. And the question of whether or not these are trends that are going to turn into permanent things is really too soon to be determined. So what we're waiting to understand right now is what happens next. What happens in 2021 as COVID continues, and also as we understand what the entertainment landscape post-COVID looks like. So with all of that in mind, I want to start the conversation on the distribution of content, and particularly the distribution of films. We just heard Disney announce earlier this week that they are reorganizing the studio and they're restructuring it to put digital at the center. And I think that's really interesting as you think about the fact that Disney was the biggest piece of the box office last year in terms of box office revenue and how that could really change things. So when you think about this distribution disruption and what the future of the movie-going business looks like, I thought I would start off with Ann, because Warner Brothers distributed Tenet, which was a rare tentpole release in this time. Tell us what you learned from that, and if you regret putting it out, when and how you did.
Thanks, Julia, and it's great to be here. We were very happy with we are very happy with the results. We knew going into the release of Tenet that it would not be a normal theatrical release. A lot of the top markets in the United States were not open, and to this day, New York, LA, and San Francisco are still not open. But the majority of our international markets were open, and given that it's Christopher Nolan and Tenet, and a movie that really deserves to be seen on the big screen, we thought we'd give it a go and release it a week before internationally and then domestically at the beginning of September. So far, we're at close to 330 million in the box office, the majority of which is from the overseas markets. The important thing about what we did, though, is not expect a big opening weekend the way life worked pre-COVID, where you'd spend your big marketing dollars before opening weekend, try to get the biggest weekend so that you set the movie on the right track. We knew that wasn't possible given the number of markets that were closed in the US. So we spread out our marketing dollars and called it more of a marathon rather than a sprint. And we're happy with the results so far, but we still have a ways to go.
And it seems like the international picture is so dramatically different from what's going on here in the US. When you released Tenet, there was this expectation that that would kick off a slew of theatrical releases and that the US box office would really be back. And now there are really no big wide releases until Wonder Woman, which is another one of your films, which is set for release in December. Do you expect to be able to keep it there? And what's your sense of when you're really going to be able to have a big US audience the way you used to, if not necessarily a huge opening weekend the way you used to?
Well, Julia, it's really about two things. It's about movie theaters opening, and that's been a patchwork in the US. And NATO, the National Association of Theater Owners, is working very closely with the government in New York and LA in particular to try to understand the expectations of when those theaters might open. So there's the theaters opening, and then there's the inclination of people to go to the theater once they are open. We're finding very good results once theaters open because, as I think you know, the theaters adopted a whole new set of safety protocols. They're calling it cinema safe. It means that there's a lot of social distancing in the theaters, usually about 30% capacity. So you're not sitting right next to somebody. There's 6 feet in front and back on the sides of you that are open and empty. You're wearing a mask when you're sitting there. They're spacing out show times so that they can clean the theaters thoroughly in between the show times. And I actually went to see Tenet in Connecticut right after it opened, and I felt great. I felt safe. It was all contactless. I bought my ticket beforehand. Everything was electronic. I went in, I watched the movie, and I left. So it's really people's inclination to go to theaters once they're open. And in terms of the rest of the year, we'll just have to see how much of the additional markets open and how much of the existing markets that are open stay open.
Very interesting. Certainly a different way to go to the movies. Donna, I want to go to you because you have interesting perspective here. You are doing the international distribution for the new James Bond film, which obviously just got moved from this fall to next year. And you have done a lot of direct-to-consumer releases. You know, we were the first one to do that with your Trolls release very early in the COVID lockdowns. What is your outlook on when the theatrical window will really open up again?
Well, first of all, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and Julia, thank you. So, as you said at the top of this, there's not really a line of sight into exactly when things will return to any kind of a new normal. We could be impaired from anything from 6 months into 2021 to all the way through 2021. So, one of the ways that we're looking at theatrical distribution is through the lens of video on demand and accelerating that first pay one window. So as you mentioned at the beginning of quarantine, when everything shut down, we were sheltering at home and in place. We had Trolls about to release theatrically. We spent about 70% of our marketing, and there was no opportunity to move that film and get out alive financially. So we made the decision to stand up a premium video on demand offering. We work closely with our digital retail partners, Comcast, Amazon, to name a few, and we released the movie day and date. It was never our intention to do day and date PVOD on a long-term basis, but it really was the only way for us to monetize that film at the time. Since then, we've released a number of movies in that same way, but as theatrical has, particularly overseas, has reopened in some areas, we've been able to do a hybrid model of this rental. Premium video on demand, by the way, is a 48-hour rental in the home at the price point of $20 as we look at it. So we've been able to do this sort of combination. And as we look to the future, we think this is a very important window for us. We've made a sort of a landmark deal with AMC here in the US to be able to release movies theatrically, and then have the optionality to release them in-home in this rental basis 17 days later. Now, that doesn't mean to say we're going to do that with all movies. If movies are playing well at the box office, they will continue in theaters. But since most movies do generate most of their box office revenue within the first, or 75% at least within the first 3 weeks, we felt that was a pretty fair deal. We like this deal. It obviously helps us shore up our business model for our films, particularly as we are looking at an impaired theatrical landscape into the future. But it also helps our exhibition partners by being able to share in the revenue stream there. And what I really like about it is it gives our audiences a consumer optionality, not having to wait 90 days to get a movie that they've enjoyed in the movie theater, and be able to, get it 17 days afterwards, and also for us to be able to, capitalize on the marketing expenditure that we have. It's a very important way of us augmenting the distribution ecosystem as we head into our uncertain future.
Yeah, and I really think it's important to underscore, just for those in the audience who are less familiar with what we call this theatrical window, is it was traditionally a 3-month window between the theatrical and at-home release, and to shorten it to 17 days is very dramatic. And it sounds, Donna, like you will have the flexibility to make the decision about whether to leave a film in theaters or to wait in terms of releasing and at home. Tell me about that flexibility and how different that is from the way you used to do things, making decisions at times years in advance.
Yeah, so as I said, we do have the flexibility. If a movie is playing, it'll stay in the movie theaters. But if because of either the competitive landscape or just the nature of the movie, it's really run its course theatrically, having that optionality to be able to move into that first window and get it into the home. It just, as you say, gives us a lot of flexibility. I think where I'm anticipating it's also going to be hugely helpful is as we come back online post-COVID, our business models are, they were challenged prior to COVID, and a lot of those trends that we saw happening and being upon us that were challenging that business model only have accelerated during COVID. So, it's going to give us optionality, I think, in our green light decisions as well. Again, by being able to efficiently monetize our movies, all the way through the distribution landscape.
And George, I promise I will come to you soon, but first I just need to get Anne to respond to this, because this is such a big shift in terms of a studio's approach to film. Are you going to be doing anything similar with your films? Have you been negotiating with the theaters about a similar shortening and flexibility of the windows?
We've been talking to the theaters pre and post COVID. And like Donna, we released a movie shortly after Trolls, because we also had a family movie that we loved and felt that going into COVID that families were getting entertainment that they could share together. So we released the movie Scoob. We watched Universal and what they did with Trolls very carefully, and then we modified our strategy a bit, and we're very happy with that. And we told the theaters we were doing it and that we needed to get the movie out. We felt it was circumstantially the right thing to do, and they understood that. And then overseas, we released it in some cases theatrically, like Donna and Trolls. So I think the message here is there will be more flexibility going forward. I don't think it's going to be a one size fits all. As Donna said, certain movies deserve to be on the big screen and will play well and long on the big screen, and others won't. But importantly, it's how to figure out that, as Donna said, the marketing spend and getting the most out of the initial marketing spend and adjusting accordingly. So it's really focusing on the fans, what they want to see, when they want to see it. And really, I think we've got a nice little lab, if you will, to understand consumer behavior in a much more intensive way right now in COVID, and use the opportunity to kind of the silver lining of it all to understand where people's consumption habits are and where they might go coming out of the pandemic.
Certainly quite a weird little petri dish we have here of an experiment in COVID times. So Anne, I will say it sounds like you're not going to announce any deals with the theater chains yet, but we will stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. So with that, I want to bring in George. Your focus is television and the TV content business. And you have also seen the distribution of your content disrupted as production schedules were disrupted. The sports schedule has been totally wacky, and with no sports for a while and then a bunch of sports all at the same time. As you look at what was traditionally a fall TV schedule and a fall sort of a cadence of new shows being launched in the fall, how much has the traditional TV schedule been disrupted by COVID?
So first, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here. The cadence was completely disrupted. So the crazy thing for me is I actually started this job 10 days into the sheltering in place. So I walked into this insanity. And first of all, we realized we had to figure out what our fall schedule was going to be. Having no idea when productions would resume, we decided step one was to decide how we wanted to map out a schedule before even dealing with the reality of not knowing when it was going to start. So we only had one pilot shot before the shutdown happened. We took two of our drama pilots that we weren't able to shoot. We ordered them straight to series, thinking we could get writers' rooms started, scripts going. We could have as much scripts ready as possible when production could actually resume. So we did that, and then we also looked at our alternative development slate, found some shows that we thought could work, and accelerated that development. So we ended up in May actually acting as if things were normal and announcing what our schedule would be without announcing any dates. Then as it became clearer and clearer that there was no way production was going to start in normal course, we pulled together a contingency plan. We had some shows in the can already, some alternative series like Amazing Race and Undercover Boss that we had shot before COVID. We had two summer reality series, or 10 anchor reality series, Big Brother and Love Island, which both shoot in bubbles. So it was very easier to shoot them during COVID because we really could completely quarantine the cast and crew. And then in addition, we acquired some shows. We acquired some shows from our sister entities. For example, we put Star Trek Discovery 1 on the slate for September, October. We thought that would also help promote Star Trek Discovery Season 3, which is going to launch on CBS All Access actually tonight. And so we really thought there was some synergy there. And we built that out for September and October, knowing that we had other plans in place in case the schedule wasn't able to start. We luckily began to resume production slowly. The first show to start was early August, and shows have been rolling into production once we sort of launched and set up all of these safety protocols, working closely with the unions, with health and safety experts, etc. We pulled all of that together, and then we were able to finally get production going. We had it going in September, more so in September. Now, luckily, at over 85% of our shows are now in production, and I'm cautiously optimistic that we will start our season on a staggered basis, beginning the first week in November, and roll shows out after that. So a lot of change, required a lot of nimbleness, but the team came together. I'm feeling very confident about where we are now.
But in terms of the shift to a staggered launch, do you think that's going to become the norm now? I mean, we've heard from advertisers that they don't want to buy on an upfront schedule anymore and have to make their commitments so much so in advance and to work off that calendar. Do you think we'll see the whole TV business shift like that? Will we see less of a pilot season? Or how are things going to change more permanently as a result of this experiment that we're in the middle of right now in COVID?
So my view is that there's been a lot of discussion. I had these discussions when I was at NBC and here as well, that the current system, the traditional development cycle business, the traditional upfront cycle, is not the most efficient structure. And I think what COVID has done is sort of accelerated a lot of those changes. So I think we've really spent a lot of time thinking about other production models, recognizing that while there is some value in piloting things first, the challenge is it's a very suboptimal creative process because you end up racing to shoot pilots and then you race into production and you launch shows in the fall with very little time to iterate and experiment. And once you go out in the market, we all know there's so much content choices that if you stumble out of the gate, it's very difficult to recover now. So I do think things will change. I mean, I think the upfront cycle is still figuring itself out. There are different competing views on that, but I do think this is a inflection moment for us to consider other ways to launch shows and to deal and engage with our advertisers.
I think that's really interesting, the idea that this is an opportunity to reevaluate everything that may not have made sense in the past, but had been done for forever because of sort of these legacy systems. This leads to a question for all of you about the idea of engaging with your fans. And both you and Donna have these franchises, and there is a certain cadence of when you would see the next Fast and Furious movie, and you had an expectation, and so you could maintain that fan base. For Anne, it's your DC Comics characters who you expect to see in the next spinoff, and for George, it's the seasons. You anticipate to get your next season of your reality show, which obviously is easier to maintain, but you expect to see your favorite characters come back in a certain cadence. I'm curious to hear from all of you about how you're making changes to really make sure you're maintaining that relationship with a fan base and maintaining a franchise, and whether that involves doing more on the digital side or on the social side. And Anne, I'll throw this to you first because I know you've been focused on this with your DC Comics.
Yeah, and this is a really passionate area of mine. It's one of the things that I came in looking to do a year and a half ago, because I'm such a huge DC fan and a fan of franchises and fandom. And so when we went into lockdown, we knew that Comic-Con wasn't going to happen this July. So we started thinking about what we could do to surprise and delight our fans who couldn't gather in person as they love to do with cosplay and really celebrating their favorite characters. So we created something called DC Fandom, which we launched on August 22nd, which was a 24-hour global event starring a lot of the key talent across our DC movies and television series. We did panels, we had fan art, we had competitions, cosplay, and it resulted really better than we expected, with over 22 million fan interactions across 220 countries. And so that was a little bit of, necessity is the mother of invention, but we feel like we got onto something in terms of connecting with our fans in a meaningful way digitally. They're there 24/7. It's just really when we choose to serve them new content and have more interactions with them. But it's Fandom clearly let us know the fans are just waiting and craving more content, more interaction with our talent, more interaction with the characters that they know and love. So we're thinking about how to continue that on a go forward basis in between the movies, the television shows, the games, the products, the experiences. So we want to be where they are. We want to be across all media. Fans don't wake up and say, today's a motion picture day, and that's what I'm going to do. They're really across all media. And so we love being in those various media to be able to super serve them.
And Donna, can you give us a sense of how you're using the various Universal platforms, including Peacock, which is a new one, to maintain that relationship with fans around properties that have been sort of these legacy franchises that you want to make sure to maintain?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, with that big franchises, Jurassic and Fast and Furious on the live action side, to name a couple, in pre-COVID times, the way that we look at them is they're a 365-day-a-year business. The movie event is the sort of the mothership, if you will. But from that, we do have many different extensions. Actually, during COVID, we have through our DreamWorks Animation TV division, we have an incredible TV show called Jurassic Camp Cretaceous that was made, and it streams on Netflix. We'll have the second season of Spy Racers, Fast and Furious. These are high quality, high end, great animated shows that that bring along new audience members for us with the younger age groups, but also excite original fans. So that's just an example of one extension there. On Peacock, which has had a very successful launch so far, since it launched, mid-COVID, is doing really, our library titles are doing really well. And probably not surprisingly, a lot of our family titles are doing great. Trolls, I think, is a big superstar in there. And on the other digital platforms where we have some of our original deals, the Illumination catalog is on Netflix, as for instance. I know that Lorax is one of the top streaming movies there too. But also, we have gaming, we have digital extensions, we have a multitude of ways to engage our fans, as well as a very active cast on both of those movies, who engage with their fans via social media.
And George, I would be remiss if I talked about fans and didn't talk about sports fans and the role that sports has played in this unusual fall TV season, and also the questions about how sports will fit in the future. I mean, we have, we saw NFL ratings dip at the beginning of the season, raising concerns that maybe there's just too much going on to really grab those NFL fans. And then some headlines about Amazon snagging another NFL game, questions about how many how many of these sports leagues will shift some of their games over to the digital streamers. So George, I'm curious how you see sports fitting into this and into, it's such a valuable piece of your lineup.
I mean, sports is the lifeblood of broadcast television, and I think it always will be. I mean, I think we were very excited when we met with the NFL and knew the season was going to come back. We felt very confident about the protocols they have in place, and what's really been impressive is how adept they've been, when there have been inevitable cases, as we knew was going to happen. Their ability to suspend and postpone games and really keep the schedule going has been nothing short of remarkable. And the truth is, yes, initially there were some ratings concerns, but the reality is there were new headwinds that NFL normally doesn't face. For example, you got multiple leagues playing at the same time. You got basketball, NHL, etc. And now that's starting to clear out. And also, of course, we have an election like no other, and cable news ratings were up 50%. But we're seeing the momentum increase. In fact, last Sunday, our late afternoon game reached 22 million viewers, which was our highest October audience in that time slot for 5 years. So sports remains strong. It remains a tentpole for us. Our relationship with the NFL is really strong. And the Amazon moment you were talking about before, that was our additional wild card game. We retain exclusivity in our overall package. But what's exciting also about that game is not only is it going to play on on CBS and CBS All Access, but we also negotiated a simulcast right on Nickelodeon, which is going to have its own production, its own announcers, and really reflect the breadth and scope of the Viacom CBS portfolio.
I think this is a good moment to ask you all about your streamers, because you all have these streaming options, and also how those streamers compete with the likes of Netflix and Amazon Prime Video. And George, you mentioned CBS All Access. Viacom CBS has a number of streaming options, including Pluto, which is ad-supported content. You oversee both traditional and digital content creation. How do you think about that? The fact that you're able to look at where things should go or what types of content should go on different platforms, driving the power of the digital platform.
Yeah, so first of all, I would say, on the digital front, I think all of us would agree that what all of our companies had to do as challenger brands in this streaming space is really figure out what our consumer value proposition is and how do we differentiate in the marketplace. So looking at Viacom CBS, they have core anchors in the three, as you mentioned, in the free ad-supported space with Pluto, and in the premium pay space with Showtime OTT, and the broad pay space with what is now CBS All Access, which are going to enlarge and enhance and relaunch with more originals and more library in Q1 with the name under Paramount Plus. So the first thing is looking at sort of our segments and realizing that tying them together and recognizing the growth that all of them are having. I mean, as of June 30, we announced we have 16 million subscribers in our pay tiers. And with Pluto's at 26.5 million MAUs, monthly active users, which is 60% growth year over year. So we have platforms that are growing, and what we're really trying to do is migrate consumers across these segments, because we do believe that will help build customer acquisition and retention. So as part of that, as you point out, Julia, the other part of this is where does content belong? Like, how do you window content? How do you make sure that you are still serving your broadcast platform while also serving your streaming platforms? And the truth is, we're leaning into a lot of our franchises. So franchises that do extremely well on the broadcast platform are also, no surprise, doing extremely well on our OTT and streaming platform. So it's really about recognizing the value that we bring with CBS as almost an enhanced front porch tier, and then these streaming segments working together as distinct but interlocking streaming options.
So I guess that's my question. I have two questions then. One is, will you integrate all those streaming options? Because now they're all separate things. In addition to rebranding, will you integrate them all or bundle them all together? And will you prioritize digital the way that Disney just announced it would?
So first question is bundling, absolutely. I mean, I think the broad pay, the premium pay, and the fast or free ad supported, they meet different segment needs. So I don't know that you'd want to combine them, but the bundling idea for sure is a way to interlock that. And then the second part of your question, in terms of repeating where content will live.
Oh, no. So the second question, Disney just announced that they were going to prioritize digital. That was what that restructuring was about. Are you going to do the same thing?
So yes, in the sense that streaming is a priority for all of us, but I think we all have different strategies on how we look at content licensing, content production, et cetera. And I think from our standpoint, we don't necessarily believe that having a closed ecosystem is the way to go. In other words, we will have shows that will live exclusively on our platforms. We may have shows that have co-exclusive or non-exclusive arrangements. And I think a lot of that will be driven by what drives subscriber acquisition versus what drives engagement. The other piece of that too, it's not just revenue driven, it's also what are the ultimate goals here? What are you trying to accomplish? I look at, for example, shows that we've launched, that we've licensed on Netflix. It's almost been a form of least access, where these are franchises that we retain ownership of, but we're able to see how they perform on other platforms, which drives decisions around what else we do with the franchise, whether it's spin-offs or consumer products. We look at it all strategically and surgically.
Very interesting. Now, Anne, I'm curious for your thoughts on HBO Max. HBO Max also, like Peacock, launched mid-pandemic. HBO Max is a little different because you have to convert over some of those HBO subscribers. But you're obviously also looking to grow that pie. What have you seen in terms of the data so far about what's working, and how does that impact where you want to invest for this platform?
We're really pleased with the results with HBO Max so far. And, obviously with HBO as the foundation of the service, we got a great running start. And then when you add on top of that, the 97 years of Warner Brothers feature film library, Warner Brothers television, our franchises, as we discussed, like DC, Game of Thrones, all of our kids content, Looney Tunes, Hanna-Barbera, it is a really compelling offering, and we look at it almost as a mini cable bundle unto itself. So we have, it's early days, so we have a lot more to do and a lot more shows that we want to finish production on so we can get them on the service. And it is a huge priority of ours, not at the expense of our other businesses, but in more of a spirit of the whole is more than the parts. We will use what I call a flywheel or franchise flywheel to use the Turner networks and the kids networks to share windows, to promote from streaming to linear. We want to be where the fans are, and the fans are, as I said earlier, not in any one medium, but across medium. So we'll look for ways to synergize across all of them, including feature films and different windows regarding features. So it's really a great collection of assets as far as I'm concerned, and IP and content that we have to work with. And we've got a lot of work to do coming out of the pandemic, as we all do, to make sure we can finish productions, get the shows on the air. But I'm super excited. We had 25 shows that are now up and running across all of our television production, and we have 18 more to ramp up this month, and a bunch of feature films that are in production. So, we need to feed all of the hungry fans and the services that we have, and as well as our partners like George. We have a lot of great shows in production for CBS that we're excited about. So, a lot of exciting things coming up, Julia.
And I do want to talk more specifically about production, but Anne, before I turn to Donna on this, what was your reaction when you heard about Disney's reorganization? Did that make sense to you? Did it seem like they were going further than the other studios in terms of stating a commitment to digital?
It felt similar to the reorg we had a couple months ago, where the content was kind of bundled under me, and so that the seamlessness could happen with regard to movies and television and HBO Max. So we could really strategize very early in the process what kind of content we want to make for which services and which distribution outlets. So my interpretation of what Disney did was very similar to that.
And before we turn to this question of production in times of COVID, Donna, any additional thoughts on Peacock and how having Peacock as part of the Universal family enhances or changes what you're able to do in terms of content? I mean, you talked about the opportunity to use the content on Peacock to continue the relationship with fans and advance the franchises. But when you think about the content itself, is that a place for different types of films, different types of shows than you might put on traditional platforms?
Yeah, well, I think, look, one of the things that we're focused heavily on, again, pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID, I know, is this question of streaming. You know, we're very focused on figuring out how across our distribution ecosystem, you know, we begin with the theatrical experiences. We make films to put in movie theaters, and that is never going to change. But the rest of the downstream revenue needs to be sliced and diced in a slightly different way, just to to meet the demands of the changing consumer behavior, right? In addition to that, you know, we make movies with filmmakers and content creators, and that delineation between long form and short form is really, you know, it's becoming ever more, sort of blurred and blended. And so, you know, my vision is, and I know we're going to get there, is to be able to create optionality for our filmmakers and our content creators, you know, so, you know, they can be inside our studio, our company, our ecosystem, and all different types of content. And together we will figure out what is the best distribution mechanism for it, you know, and where should it go. And I think that's really the way for, you know, probably all of our companies. You know, you're sitting here talking to traditional media companies, but, you know, it's certainly the way that we're very, very focused on getting to it. That's the North Star.
Yeah, and I would say you're all traditional media companies, but you're all in digital businesses. So maybe you're all tech companies as well. You all have mentioned. Sorry.
I just want to add to Donna's point. I think it's very helpful because it's very challenging to keep talent in your ecosystem, and the more optionality you give them to create different formats, different forms, and the more they see the possibilities, the easier it is to keep the talent, you know, inside your system. So I think it also helps us from a talent retention standpoint as well.
Now, George, you and Ann and Donna all mentioned the fact that you have gotten production moving again. George, you do have all these shows that are now in production, so you could start rolling them out later this fall. I'm curious to hear how you think production will be permanently changed as a result of the additional efforts you're making to protect your cast and crew. I understand that it's more expensive to produce things now, you know, what I was calling a COVID tax, to make sure you have all these protections in place, whether it's putting your cast in a bubble or paying to have people tested frequently. So I'm curious, and you're nodding, so I'll go to you first, but so how you think these changes now will stick around or not stick around in a year from now, when hopefully things are a little bit more back to normal?
Well, we spent a lot of time negotiating with the guilds to make sure that everyone was comfortable with the new protocols when we went back into production. And there's the Zone A, which is in front of the camera, and Zone B behind the camera. Zone A was more challenging because these are people who are interacting, obviously actors and actresses, and the testing is more frequent because of that. So those protocols are really COVID specific. You know, whether the food service stays hermetically sealed after COVID, I hope not. Not sure we'll get back to buffets, but something in between perhaps. But I think that a lot of these things, honestly, Julia, are COVID specific, and rightly so. We need to take the time to make sure that we have very good protocols if something does happen on set. Contact tracing, isolating, kind of codes of conduct if you're local and you go home to your family at night, you know, kind of making sure that you stay safe and protected, so when you come back to work the next day, you've not been exposed. So this is, you know, there's thousands of people out there now working across all of our studios, and so far so good. I think people really want to get back to work and are doing what they need to do to be safe throughout it all.
And Donna, you mentioned you're coming to us from the Universal lot right now. We see the beautiful shot in the background of the mountains. And you said there are 1,000 people on the lot right now. How's that going, and how do you see that evolving as hopefully these restrictions lighten up?
Yeah, so these are TV productions that I see out of my window here. It's really great to see the lot vibrant again, and we do have up to 1,000 people between a news organization who, of course, have been here, even during the sort of initial lockdown, and our TV production teams. I can speak to film production. I think similarly to Anne, I would say that what we had to do in order to get people back to work safely, was really important for us to put that emphasis on safety, but also get the hundreds of thousands of production workforce across the world that we work with back in the saddle and back to work. We were the first major Hollywood studio to go back into production mid-July with Jurassic World. We were 10 days into shooting when quarantine and shutdown happened, and we had beautiful, fully built stages sitting there at Pinewood. And so we were able to build a 150-page protocol manual that I actually think was as helpful to us just in learning and understanding if it was even possible. But, make no mistake about it, it's difficult to shoot during this time, as Anne was describing, the green zone, as we call it, or zone A, people who have to be around each other without PPE, the amount of testing, amount of contact tracing, and also having the sort of the grit, if you will, to understand that you've got these protocols in place. So people, it's not about preventing people from coming to work, potentially with COVID. It's about what happens if and when. Those protocols work. You can isolate people quickly, you can separate people and do the contact tracing. So it does work. So my great hope is honestly that we don't have to contend with this in a new normal post-COVID. It's a drag. It does make it very difficult for the people on set. But look, if there's some efficiencies, if there's some ease of getting through your day faster because you only have 50 people on set as opposed to 250, I'm sure that production managers are going to be looking at some of those things for sure.
Well, Donna, you raise a very important question that I would like all of you to answer, which is the challenge of leading during these uncertain and unusual times. And George, I'm going to ask you this question first because you started your job during COVID. You're all in creative industries. You want people to be able to collaborate, come up with new ideas, new ways of approaching storytelling. And it's so hard to do when everyone's stuck at home and only really can be brought together once a lot of that creative process has already happened. George, how have you approached not only taking on a new job, but also leading and inspiring your staff to be creative in these times?
Yeah, so for me, it was out of pure necessity because I walked into the job under these circumstances. And I will say, the night before I started the job, I had a full-on panic attack because I couldn't really figure out how I was going to lead, how I was going to build trust and transparency remotely. But I think what all of us did is we all just sort of leaned into it, and we all just acknowledged the awkwardness of it, acknowledged the awkwardness of not trying to speak over each other and trying to figure out how to find a rhythm in Zoom. But I think the other piece that I've seen it do is I've seen it also sort of create sort of an equalizing effect, because I think a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily speak up in a room are speaking up more, and I'm hearing a lot of, on the creative side and the business side, people really speaking up and sharing their points of view. So I think it's been challenging, but the creative adaptivity I've seen has just been pretty extraordinary. And I think it starts from us as leaders to really lean in and support in every way we can to make sure that people feel like it's a safe space to continue to do the work we have to do. But I was just going back to the earlier point, as much as I agree that it's mostly the COVID protocols and safety was the number one criteria, I do believe that some of the efficiencies that Donna was talking about are going to come out of the system. I've spoken to showrunners and particularly animation showrunners who've actually found it's a more efficient way to produce, and it's a more creative way for them to work. So I think it will all, once we, God willing, get through COVID, it will sort of organically evolve, and some of the aspects of production and creativity that work in this environment will continue, and the ones that won't will go back to the traditional course.
And Anne, your job, you're relatively new to your CEO role, and then your job has been expanded during COVID as well. What has been your approach?
Yeah, just echoing what George just said, our animators, both in Warner Brothers Animation as well as Cartoon Network and Adult Swim, did not miss a beat throughout COVID. And I think, I don't know if it's more efficient, but they certainly figured out a way to keep things going virtually, as did our game developers and our whole game division. They were probably at 80 or 90% of production capacity. So it is amazing what you can do when faced with these very unprecedented and difficult circumstances. And I'd also like to agree with George that this has been a mode of being a great equalizer. Previously you would all sit in a room in a meeting and there would be one or two people from an international division or from another location in the United States. And having worked at the BBC for 9 years before this, and having always been the person on the video screen where everyone else is sitting around the table in London, it's just never the same when you're on the screen. Now that we're all on the screen, you could argue that everyone has a relatively equal voice. And that's something that I've thought about as a way to work going forward. For example, when there is a hybrid of people in person and then on the screen, maybe we should just all be on the screen. If you can't all be in person, maybe everyone should be on the screen, because I really do think it changes the dynamic of who has a voice. And I've seen the creativity in our organization just really skyrocket over these last few months. I mean, when we first went into lockdown, I worked with our team to come up with 10 transformation projects because, believe it or not, I thought people might not be as busy during the pandemic. So we set up these new, future of work. How do we transform this business and that business? And we had 10 discrete projects. A couple of weeks in, I heard from people like, we love these projects, but we're so incredibly busy. We're working around the clock. And so no good deed goes unpunished. I thought I could give them some meaty projects, which they took on. But what I didn't account for was how exhausting it was trying to manage in a pandemic, because there is no playbook. And what you do all day long is you think about scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? What should our plan be? Plan A, plan B, plan C. So without precedence, it is incredibly mentally taxing to try to think about what the right way to go forward is. And I'm sure Donna faced this with Trolls. As she said, she was about to launch the movie in theaters. We faced this with Scoob. It seems easy in retrospect, like, of course you release your movie digitally, but it's not so easy as it's happening, because oftentimes these are new moves that you're making, and you have to think about all the constituents. You have to think about your fans and what they want, and predict what the result's going to be without any past market data. So that's the thing to me that has been probably the most difficult, but honestly the most exciting too, because every day is a new adventure.
So Donna, as I put this question to you, since you already did talk a bit about leadership, I'm going to also ask you about diversity, because this is an area you've been focused on for many years, but has really come to the fore in the public conversation and the conversation about content. As you lead through this crisis, how are you emphasizing the importance of diversity, both in the content creators and in the voices you're putting on screen?
Yeah. Well, I think a word that comes to mind is resiliency. When I think about what happened here in Los Angeles, that weekend after the protests in the wake of George Floyd, I was not prepared for the tsunami of emotion that came across the transom from our employees. So here we have employees all over the world working remotely, trying to figure out, how to manage that. And then here we are with another, pandemic, at our doorstep here. And so I very quickly, I recognized the importance of connection, all throughout COVID, reaching into the organization, in small ways and big ways, through town halls, through funny videos, of a sort of humiliating things that happen, at home when you're trying to work, with your kids and dogs and whatever, to small chat rooms and fireside chats. And so, what we quickly stood up were a series of small groups, where I could cover a lot of ground, where our senior leadership team could cover a lot of ground, and meet with people and have very raw, very open discussions. And I think these were very cathartic to begin with, but they quickly transformed into action. So we had a lot of support from Comcast. They made a huge commitment, a financial commitment that has enabled us to, really quickly stand up programs and get them on their feet. We stood up a new diversity, equity, and inclusion committee that involves senior leadership, but also leadership from down inside the company. We're sort of doing a top-down and a bottom-up approach. As you said, we have been at this a while and very intentional about the creative talent that we're in business with and the types of movies that we make. We've had a huge amount of business success, as well as just sort of ethical success. And now the real goal and the work is to bring that into the workplace. We've all seen the numbers; they need improving, and so recruitment, retention, and just being very intentional and very focused on making our work culture an anti-racist, equitable culture where everybody feels seen and heard and included.
I want to continue this conversation about diversity, but I also want to make sure to bring in questions from the audience, and some of these do tie into diversity. So I will ask this question from Jenna. It says, how has COVID-19 changed the conversations with talent, whether it's about creating those new relationships, or whether talent is asking for different accommodations due to the changes of the production schedules, extended time away? Do you want to weigh in on that, George or Anne?
Sure. I mean, I think, every talent is different. There are people who couldn't wait to get back to work and very anxious, and there are people who were very concerned about it and have a lot of thoughts and wanted a lot of counsel and understanding about how it was going to work before they felt comfortable coming back to work. Again, being in zone A, where you're an actor and you can't keep your mask on, so you don't have the PPE protection, makes you feel all the more vulnerable. So what I've told my team is to be very thoughtful about this and to make sure that we are sitting down and talking to our talent and not making anyone do anything they're not comfortable with. So I think those conversations are ongoing, and I think they're feeling heard, which I think is helping.
And in terms of the diversity and making sure that you're elevating diverse voices, there's a question here from Peter. Ryan Coogler was a young director fresh out of film school who demonstrated incredible success and talent. Is there any concern about sourcing talent from film schools, given their film school experience is drastically different this year? I know this is sourced in many ways, and not just from film schools. But Anne, how are you thinking about accessing a diverse array of content creators in this time when, in many circumstances, I would assume people are turning to the agents they know and the relationships they already have? It could be harder to access the new voices.
Yeah, it's a great point, and we do have programs with local writers programs and different points of access with different diversity and inclusion organizations to make sure that, to your point, Julia, that we do get access to kind of the voices that aren't on the beaten track. And honestly, it's just putting your money where your mouth is. We have dozens of deals with talent, many of whom are diverse. So when people, you kind of see where the critical mass of diversity is amongst the various studios and networks, et cetera. But when we have the likes of Ava DuVernay and Mindy Kaling, Michael B. Jordan, Roberto Aguirre-Sagasa, James Wan. We're really proud of the diversity of the talent that we have. And then really it's about, making sure that we hear the pitches, that we create new talent deals with the next generation of talent, that we have on-screen representation of diversity and inclusion. And it's an ongoing effort, but as Donna said, I would say that it has really become even more heightened this past year in June with all of the social unrest. So we've also made it a moral and business imperative to have a layer of transparency, inclusiveness, to make sure that people feel that they can bring their whole selves to work. And that we continue to work to make sure that the product and content that we put out represents the broadness of our audiences. And you're never done, right? This is always a work in progress. We actually were the first studio to adopt a production diversity policy back in 2018. So we now measure diversity within our productions, and we report on that, which is, again, I think somebody said, transparency and communication is a huge aspect of this.
And George, I would love to get just a quick thought on you, the opportunity you see in taking this job when you did, just at the right ahead of the peak of this Black Lives Matter conversation, and also in the midst of COVID. Is this an opportunity for you to accelerate efforts around diversity?
Yeah, I definitely think it is. I mean, I definitely think diversity, equity, and inclusion is at a moment right now, and the challenge for all of us is to make it not performative, but make it actually sort of a long-term, far-reaching goal to really build a truly inclusive representation across the organization, front, behind the cameras, but also, as Donna said, with executive as well. So one of the things that I've really been focusing on is really sourcing talent, not just from the traditional agencies, but actually we built a partnership with the NAACP where we're trying to source out writers of color outside of the traditional ecosystem. We really just have to build a wider net, and we also, really importantly, have to remain accountable. I mean, in my view, just as my senior leadership team has to meet their budgets, this is another key KPI. So each year, present a plan to me, tell me what your short-term, mid-term, and long-term objectives are, and you'll be benchmarked against that in terms of job performance. It's just got to be embedded in everything we do as one of our key priorities.
Transparency and accountability, very important to stress those. And we're almost out of time, but I want to get to two last audience questions, both of which are about the theatrical experience. Christopher asking to Donna whether you can speak to the AMC deal as the theaters get a piece of the PVOD revenue. Will studios consider buying theaters in a fire sale now that the 1948 Paramount decree is struck down?
We have no plans to do that currently.
And do you want to respond to this question as well?
We don't have those. We have no plans either.
That would have been very exciting news if either of you wanted to announce that today. Now, a broader question, perhaps, on the same topic is, what do the studios see as their responsibility within the theatrical ecosystem, and what if they all just pivoted to D2C? Now, I think you've both said you're not going to just pivot to D2C, but I'd love to get a quick final thought from both Anne and Donna on this one. George, you're off the hook, thanks to your focus on TV. Donna, I'll go to you first. How do you think of your responsibility in that theatrical ecosystem?
Yeah, I think, look, as I've said, we are committed to the theatrical experience. We have movies to be released in the fourth quarter of this year. Cruise will go in theaters, and then it will go into the home. I think our deal with AMC demonstrates our commitment to theater owners. It is a way, I think only enabled by COVID, because it took COVID to demonstrate that it is not cannibalistic, that it is in fact additive across, both exhibition and studios, and we believe that it will enable us to continue to make movies and put them in movie theaters and rationalize our business model, very importantly.
We're big fans of the theatrical exhibition experience. I'm kind of an armchair sociologist, and I believe people want to have communal experiences, and especially with certain genres that we saw, certainly before COVID, and I believe we'll continue to see post-COVID, the superhero movies, the large action adventure movies, horror. People want to be scared as a group. It's kind of petrifying to be home alone and be scared. So, and then, filmmaker-centric movies, like we'll have In the Heights come out in spring, which, again, back to diversity and inclusion, is a wonderful celebration of Hispanic culture. Lin-Manuel Miranda's first Broadway musical. So we'll support it, and we're big fans of the exhibitors. They've been great partners to ours for many decades. I'm rooting for them. I know it's tough sledding right now, but I'm hoping they come out on the other side even stronger.
Well, I think that is a sentiment held by all three of you. Hope that on the other side of this pandemic, the businesses may be more efficient, but the demand is still there. And so Ann Sarnoff, George Cheeks, Donna Langley, I want to thank all three of you for joining us today for this dynamic conversation with so many uncertainties. It's great to see your insight and optimism about where we go from here. So thank you so much. And I want to thank the folks at the Milken Institute for having me back to moderate this conversation. And I wish everyone best of luck with the media industry in the next year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jillian.
Thank you. Thank you.